Well, hello again, children. It's wonderful to have you back here joining me for another adventure from the North Pole. Now, let me ask you something. What do you think of when you hear the word sleigh? Maybe you picture something simple and elegant, polished wood, gleaming runners, and a few jingling bells to set the mood. Something right out of a snow-dusted storybook. But my sleigh, my friends, my sleigh is a league of its own. This isn't just a sleigh, it's a marvel of magic and engineering designed to handle the most impossible job in the world. From icy peaks to bustling cities, from chimney tops to snowy forests, my sleigh needs to soar through it all without missing a stop. And believe me, it takes a lot of hard work and clever thinking to get it ready for Christmas Eve. Now, every year, we add a little something new to the sleigh. Last year, it was a magic-infused stabilizers to help keep it steady in windy weather. Oh, these were a game changer. And this year, we've outdone ourselves with some incredible upgrades. The sleigh now has magical boosters that make it glide faster than a shooting star. It also has the brightest navigation crystal we've ever had. Why, just one glance at that crystal and it feels like the whole world lights up. But of course, these upgrades don't just happen on their own. Behind every bell and booster is the hard work of one special elf, Tim, the North Pole's sleigh engineer extraordinaire. Now, Tim's not like your usual tinkerers. No. Tim has a mind like a whirlwind, always thinking, always creating, and always finding ways to make things better. He's the sort of elf who can look at a pile of spare parts and see a masterpiece waiting to happen. Now, Tim's a bit of a perfectionist too. He checks every bolt, every charm, and every magical thread to make sure the sleigh is in perfect shape. It's a big responsibility, of course, but Tim loves it. And lucky for me, he's got a fantastic team by his side, including Docky, our sleigh repair expert, and Tricky, who has a knack for mechanical puzzles. Together, they make sure the sleigh is not just good, but extraordinary. But yesterday, children, even Tim had a day he wasn't quite expecting. You see, we were running the sleigh through the final test, checking every system, polishing every bell, and making a few trial runs through the frosty skies. Everything was going smoothly, or so we thought. But then, well, let's just say the magical boosters had a little surprise in store for us. What a day it was, children. Tim, Docky, and Tricky had to put their heads together. And let me tell you, there were a few moments when I wasn't sure if the sleigh would be ready in time. But as you'll see, no challenge is too great when you've got determination, ingenuity, and a little bit of teamwork. So let me tell you all about it. Now, the sleigh workshop is a true gem of the North Pole. It's tucked away at the base of Sparkle Peak, its tall, frosted windows glowing with golden light that spills out into the snowy night. The sound of industry hums through the air, the rhythmic clink of tools, the soft crackle of magical spells being cast, and the occasional excited chatter of elves hard at work. The workshop is warm and bustling, a stark contrast to the chill crisp of the snowy landscape outside. Inside, it's a marvel of engineering and enchantment. Long wooden workbenches are scattered with blueprints, magical crystals, and jars of glittering dust. Shelves line the walls, brimming with tools and arranged from the practical, a sturdy wrench or a coil of wire, to the extraordinary, like spell-infused spanners and levitating screwdrivers. And right in the centre of it all, like a queen on her throne, sits the sleigh. Now, oh children, the sleigh is a sight to behold. Its crimson frame gleams with rich metallic sheen, the golden filigree along its edges catching the light like threads of sunlight. The runners, polished to perfection, look sharp enough to carve through the icy tundra. Every detail of the sleigh, from its curved lines, its glittering bells, speaks of care and craftsmanship. This isn't just a mode of transport, it's the heart of the Christmas magic itself. But of course, a sleigh like this doesn't stay in tip-top shape on its own. No, it's the hard work of the elves and the workshop that make it soar. And leading them all is Tim, the North Pole's sleigh engineer extraordinaire. He's always tinkering, always thinking, and always finding ways to improve things. He has a sharp mind and a steady hand, and when he's at his workbench, you can practically see the gears turning in his head. Tim isn't flashy or loud. He's calm, methodical, and endlessly creative. Yesterday, he stood at his usual station near the centre of the workshop, his dark brown hair neatly combed and his round spectacles perched on his nose. His workbench was an organised chaos of blueprints, magical tools, and enchanted components. "All right, team," Tim said, his voice calm but commanding as he addressed the other elves. "Today's the big day. We've got a trial run scheduled for lunchtime, and I want the sleigh to be flawless." Tim's team was small but mighty. First there was Docky, the workshop's repair expert. Docky is steady as a snowdrift and twice as dependable. Her hands are like magic themselves, capable of fixing anything from a cracked runner to a faulty booster with quiet precision. "I'll handle the runners," Docky said, grabbing her polishing kit and heading towards the sleigh. "We'll have them so smooth they'll glide like butter on hot toast." Then there was Tricky, the sleigh's navigation specialist. Tricky might be small, but she's sharp as an icicle on a frosty morning. She has an uncanny knack for spotting flaws that others miss, and her attention to detail is second to none. Yesterday she was perched on a stool, holding the sleigh's navigation crystal up to the light. The crystal sparkled like a diamond, casting little rainbows across the workshop. "It's looking good," Tricky said, turning the crystal this way and that, "brighter than ever. This'll keep the big fella on track, even in a blizzard." I think I must be the big fella. "Great work, Tricky," Tim said, giving her an approving nod. But the real star of today was the sleigh's newest feature, the magical boosters. These weren't your ordinary boosters, oh no. They were infused with a special kind of magic designed to give the sleigh an extra burst of speed. When activated, they sent the sleigh gliding through the air faster than a shooting star. Tim had been working on these boosters for months, perfecting every spell and tweaking every mechanism to ensure they worked flawlessly. Yesterday was the big moment, the first full test of the boosters during a trial run. "All right, everyone," Tim said, gathering his team near the sleigh. "We've run the numbers. We've tested the components and everything is ready. This trial run will tell us if the boosters are performing as expected. Docky, I'll need you to monitor the runners during the flight. Tricky, keep an eye on the navigation crystal, and I'll handle the boosters from the control panel." Docky and Tricky nodded, their faces alight with determination. "And remember," Tim added with a grin, "this isn't just about speed, it's about magic. Every detail matters, and I know we've got what it takes to make this the best sleigh yet." The team let out a cheer. Their excitement filled the workshop like a burst of winter sunshine. By mid-morning, the workshop was alive with activity. Docky worked on the runners, her tools clinking softly as she polished the smooth in every inch. "No scratches, no bumps, no excuses," Docky muttered as she worked, her focus unshakable. Tricky, meanwhile, was double-checking the crystal's alignment, her sharp eyes catching even the tiniest imperfections. She adjusted it carefully, murmuring to herself as she worked. "Almost there," she said, tightening the final adjustment. "Perfect." And Tim? Well, Tim was at the heart of it all, running his hands over the boosters and whispering the incantations that activated the magical circuits. A soft blue glow began to emanate from the boosters, pulsing gently as the spells came to life. "All right," Tim said, his voice steady as he climbed into the sleigh. "Let's take her out to the launch track." The elves gathered around, their breath visible in the frosty air as they watched the sleigh glide onto the track. It was a picture-perfect moment, the crimson frame gleaming under the workshop lights, the golden runners sparkling like sunlit snow, and the boosters humming with magical energy. Everything was ready, or so they thought. But then, my friends, just as the sleigh began to move off, something unexpected happened. The sleigh glided along the track with the kind of elegance you'd expect from the centuries of North Pole craftsmanship. Tim was seated at the controls, his hands steady and his brow furrowed in concentration, while Docky and Tricky monitored every detail from the workshop floor. The boosters hummed with raw magical power, their soft blue glow casting ripples of light onto the snow-dusted beams above. Everything seemed to be on track for the perfect trial run. And then, just as Tim pushed the boosters to the next power level, the first flicker of trouble appeared. It was so small at first, barely a spark, just a faint splutter from the left booster. Docky, with her sharp eyes and years of experience, noticed it immediately. "Did anyone else see that?" Docky muttered, stepping closer to the track. She tilted her head, watched the booster with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Looked like a hiccup in the magical flow." Tim glanced down at the gauges on his control panel. "Everything looks fine from here," he called back, though his fingers hovered over the rune that controlled the boosters, ready to make adjustments if needed. Tricky, perched beside the navigation crystal, squinted at the flickering blue light. "I saw it too," she said, her voice sharper now. "Tim, I think the booster's a little out of sync." But before anyone could investigate further, the problem grew worse. The left booster let out a sputtering crackle, sending a small burst of blue sparks onto the ice track below. The sleigh wobbled, tilting precariously to one side, and the once harmonious hum of the boosters turned into an uneven whine. "Boosters aren't balanced," Docky shouted, her voice urgent, as she jogged alongside the sleigh. Tim's hands flew over the controls, adjusting the power levels in an attempt to stabilize the sleigh. "I'm compensating," he called out, though his tone betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Docky, what's it doing?" Docky didn't hesitate. Her boots crunched against the icy floor as she ran closer to the sleigh, her sharp eyes fixed on the spluttering booster. "It's the spell matrix in the left booster," she said, pointing to the crackling component. "It's feeding the magic unevenly. It's throwing the whole system off balance." What happened next sent the workshop into an uproar. The wobble turned into a lurch, and then as the left booster flared again, the sled spun violently to one side. The runners screeched against the icy track, sending up a shower of sparks that lit the air with tiny blue stars. "Tim!" Tricky shouted, clutching the navigation crystal as the turbulence sent a shudder through the sleigh. "It's pulling too hard to the left. The crystal's alignment is off." Tim adjusted the controls again, his fingers moving faster now, but the sleigh wasn't responding. The left booster flared too brightly, sending out a burst of magical energy that rippled across the workshop. The glow of the fairy lights above dimmed under the strain, and several enchanted tools on the nearby workbenches clattered to the floor. "Shut it down!" Docky yelled, her voice rising over the growing hum of the malfunctioning booster. "If it keeps pulling like this, it could damage the whole sleigh." "I'm trying," Tim replied, his jaw clenched as he pressed the shutdown rune on the control panel, but the left booster refused to comply. Instead, it sputtered again, its magic flaring erratically, and the sleigh spun faster, its frame jerking wildly as it threatened to veer off the track. Across the workshop, other elves scrambled to get out of the way. Several ducked behind the safety barrier, their wide eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding in the center of the room. Even Docky, who rarely seemed emotion, looked genuinely concerned as she tried to keep pace with the spinning sleigh. It was clear this wasn't going to be a one elf fixed. Tim was the first to act. With his sharp mind and steady hands, he tried everything he could to stabilize the sleigh from the control panel. But even as his fingers flew over the glowing runes, he knew he'd need more than one elf operation to bring the sleigh back under control. "Docky, I need your eyes on that booster," Tim shouted, his voice cutting through the din of whirring magic and clattering tools. "I can't shut it down from here. The matrix isn't responding to the controls." Docky, ever calm under pressure, was already moving. With her sturdy boots crunching against the ice track, she jogged alongside the sleigh, her sharp eyes fixed on the spluttering booster. Docky wasn't the type to panic. Her strength came from her ability to assess a problem and tackle it head-on. "I see it," Docky called back. "The spell matrix is completely out of alignment. It's feeding the magic unevenly. It's throwing off the entire system." Tim's brow furrowed as he glanced at the gauges on the control panel. "Can you fix it from the outside?" "I'll try," Docky replied, already pulling a small toolkit from her belt. But as she reached for the sleigh's frame, the left booster let out another violent burst of sparks, forcing her to step back. "It's too unstable," Docky said, shaking her head. "If we don't stabilize it first, the whole thing could overload." And children, this is where the true magic of the North Pole comes into play. Not the kind you weave with spells, but the kind that comes from teamwork. Tricky, Tim called out, turning to the sharp-eyed elf perched near the navigation crystal. Can you keep the crystal steady while we handle the booster? If it flickers out, we'll lose the sleigh's balance completely. On it, Tricky replied without hesitation. She grabbed a set of enchanted tools from the nearby bench and began fine-tuning the crystal's housing. Tricky's hands moved with the precision of an artist, her sharp eyes scanning the crystal for even the slightest imperfection. Docky, Tim continued, his voice steady despite the chaos. Can you stabilize to calm the booster long enough to realign the matrix? Docky nodded, already reaching into her toolkit for the small rune-covered device. I'll need a stabilizer from the supply shelves, she called, her voice carrying across the workshop. An eager young elf named Sprinkle immediately sprang into action. With her twin pigtails bouncing and her boots skidding slightly on the icy floor, she darted towards the back of the workshop where the stabilizers were stored. I'll get it, Sprinkle said, her voice bright with determination. Oh, Sprinkle, she's one of our younger elves, always eager to help and as quick as a flash. Watching her weave through the bustling workshop was like watching a reindeer in mid-flight, graceful, swift, and utterly focused. While Sprinkle dashed for the stabilizer, Docky edged closer to the sleigh, her boots gripping the icy track as she braced herself against the spinning frame. Sparks from the malfunctioning booster danced around her, their blue light casting flickering shadows on her determined face. I'll need you to keep the sleigh steady while I work, Docky called to Tim, her voice calm but commanding. Tim nodded, his hands flying over the control panel. He adjusted the remaining booster, redirecting their magic to counteract the imbalance. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it slowed the sleigh's wild spin enough for Docky to climb onto the side of the frame. Be careful, Tricky called, glancing up from her work on the navigation crystal. Her sharp eyes followed Docky's movements, her heart pounding as she inched closer to the sputtering booster. Careful's my middle name, Docky replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Moments later, Sprinkle returned, clutching the stabilizer tightly in her hands. She skidded to a stop beside the sleigh, her breath visible in the frosty air. Here, she said, holding the stabilizer up for Docky. Docky grabbed the device with a nod of thanks. Good work, Sprinkle, she said, her tone steady as she began attaching the stabilizers to the booster's frame. As Docky worked, Tricky continued fine-tuning the navigation crystals. Her fingers were a blur as she adjusted the crystal's alignment, her mind racing through calculations and adjustments. The crystal is holding steady for now, Tricky called out, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and focus. But we're on borrowed time. I'm almost there, Docky replied, her voice calm despite the flickering sparks around her. She tightened the stabilizer's clamps and activated its runes, which glowed faintly as she began to absorb the booster's erratic magic. That should buy a few minutes, Docky muttered, glancing at the stabilizer's glow. Tim, how's it looking from your end? Tim checked the gauges on the control panel, his brow furrowing as he analyzed the readings. The booster's stabilizing, he said, a note of hope creeping into his voice. But the matrix still needs a full realignment. Tricky, can you get up there and finish the job? On my way, Tricky replied, handing her tools to a nearby elf to monitor the crystal. She climbed onto the sleigh's frame with the agility of someone who'd spent her life solving mechanical puzzles. Let's do this, Tricky said, her eyes gleaming with determination as she joined Docky at the booster. And that, children, was the moment the tide began to turn. With Docky holding the stabilizer steady and Tricky recalibrating the spell matrix, the left booster's erratic sputtering began to subside. Tim, still at the control panel, adjusted the magical flow, fine-tuning the system to match Tricky's alignment. We're almost there, Tricky called, her sharp eyes focused on the intricate runes etched onto the booster's frame. Docky, hold it steady for a few more seconds. You've got it, Docky replied, her hands as steady as ever. You see, children, this is the magic of teamwork. Each elf brought their unique skills to the table, and together they turned a chaotic situation into a triumph. And as the booster's glow returned to a steady, even light, the sleigh itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But the adventure wasn't over yet. Fixing the sleigh, you see, children, wasn't just a matter of tools and magic. It was a symphony of skill, coordination, and determination. Every elf played their part, and it was nothing short of magnificent. With the stabilizer in place and the sleigh momentarily steadied, Docky and Tricky didn't waste a second. Docky, holding the stabilizer tightly against the sputtering booster, glanced at Tricky with a calm nod. The matrix is holding for now, but the spell runes are still out of sync, she said, her voice steady. Tricky adjusted her goggles, her sharp eyes scanning the etched lines of magic on the booster's surface. I can fix the runes, she said, pulling a tiny enchanted chisel and a glowing magnifying glass from her tool belt. But I'll need you to keep it perfectly steady. Even a little vibration could throw it all off. Docky nodded again, her strong hands gripping the stabilizer as though it were the only thing keeping the sleigh in the air, which it was. I'm not letting go, she said firmly. And Docky wasn't kidding. She held that stabilizer as though it were the most important task in the world, which in this moment it absolutely was. While Docky braced the stabilizer, Tricky climbed up onto the sleigh, her small frame moving with the agility of an acrobat. Sparks still flickered faintly from the booster, but Tricky didn't flinch. She adjusted her goggles again, the lens amplifying the faint glow of the spell runes etched on the booster's frame. All right, she muttered to herself, positioning her chisel over the first damage rune. Let's do this. Her chisel moved with precision, carefully reshaping the runes to restore the booster's energy flow. As she worked, the damaged lines began to glow more brightly, their light shifting from a weak, flickering blue to a steady, vibrant glow. How's it looking, Tricky? Tim called out from the control panel, his hands still flying over the gauges to keep the sleigh balanced. The stabilizer's holding and I'm about halfway through the matrix, Tricky explained, not taking her eyes off the work. Just keep the power steady on your end. Tim adjusted the booster's power output slightly, his movements precise. Docky, any signs of strain on the stabilizer? None so far, Docky said, her voice calm but firm. This thing's doing its job. Meanwhile, the other elves in the workshop worked quietly to tidy up the chaos caused by the earlier turbulence. Tools were picked up, benches straightened, and a few elves brought over warm mugs of cocoa to keep the repair team going. Even in the midst of the tension, there was a sense of camaraderie and support that only the North Pole could provide. As Tricky neared the final rune, the tension in the workshop was palpable. Every elf watched in hushed anticipation, their breath visible in the frosty air. The sleigh hovered steadily now, its wobble gone thanks to Docky's stabilizing work and Tim's deft adjustments. But the repair wasn't complete, and everyone knew that one wrong move could undo everything. Almost there, Tricky muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. She etched the final line of the last rune, its glow intensifying as the magic within the booster realigned. The air around the sleigh seemed to hum with energy, a faint, harmonious vibration that signaled the spell matrix was finally coming back into balance. Tim, give it a test surge, Tricky called out, stepping back slightly to examine her work. Tim's hands moved over the controls, his fingers poised over the activation runes. He glanced at Docky and Tricky, his expression serious. Everyone ready? Do it, Docky said simply, her grip on the stabilizer unwavering. Tim activated the test surge, sending a controlled pulse of magical energy through the boosters. The left booster flared to life, its glow steady and even for the first time of the day. The hum of its magic smooth and harmonious, blending perfectly with the boosters. It's holding, Tim explained. It's holding, Tim exclaimed, a relieved smile spreading across his face. Docky let out a small breath, her usual calm demeanour softening into quiet satisfaction. Told you we'd get it sorted, she said, stepping back from the stabilizer as the booster's glow stabilized completely. Tricky adjusted her goggles and grinned. And with time to spare, she added, the sleigh is going to fly like a dream. But of course, children, the elves weren't about to leave anything to chance. Even with the booster repaired, Tim insisted on running a full series of tests to ensure the sleigh was in perfect condition. Docky, check the stabilizers one more time, Tim said, his tone a mix of relief and determination. Tricky, can you recalibrate the navigation crystal to account for the earlier turbulence? Already on it, Tricky replied, her hands a blur as she adjusted the crystal's alignment. The golden gem glowed brightly, its light casting shimmering patterns on the walls of the workshop. Docky inspected the stabilizer with her usual thoroughness, tightening its clamps and checking the runes for any signs of strain. "Everything looks solid," she said after a few minutes. "The booster isn't going anywhere." Tim nodded, his confidence returning. "All right, let's power up and see how she flies." The sleigh's boosters powered up once more, their hum filling the workshop with a warm, steady vibration. Tim guided the sleigh along the track, its crimson frame gliding effortlessly as the boosters propelled it forward. The elves watched in awe as the sleigh picked up speed, its golden runners skimming the icy surface like they were made of light. The left booster, which had caused so much trouble just minutes earlier, now shone with a steady, vibrant glow, perfectly synchronized with the others. "She's flying beautifully," Tim said, his voice filled with pride as he guided the sleigh into a gentle hover. Docky crossed her arms, her expression as steady as ever, but with a hint of a smile. "Just another day's work," she said, though everyone knew it had been anything but ordinary. "You did it," Tricky said, adjusting her goggles with a grin. "You saved Christmas magic, one booster at a time." And that, children, is how the sleigh was brought back to life, not with magic alone, but with the determination, skill, and teamwork of some truly remarkable elves. So, children, after a day filled with sparks, spins, and a fair bit of tension, the sleigh stood victorious. Its left booster, which had caused so much trouble, now hummed as smoothly as a lullaby. The sleigh itself seemed to glow brighter, as though grateful for the care and attention it had received. Tim, Docky, and Tricky gathered around the sleigh, their faces glowing with pride, and perhaps a little bit of well-earned exhaustion. The other elves, who had been watching the final test with bated breath, erupted into cheers. The sound of their celebration filled the workshop, echoing off the snow-dusted rafters above. "Great work, everyone," Tim said, his voice calm but filled with quiet pride. He placed a hand on the sleigh's crimson frame, his touch as gentle as a snowflake landing on a branch. "We did it." Docky, ever the steady one, simply nodded. "She's ready," she said, her voice low and sure. Tricky, on the other hand, couldn't contain her excitement. She adjusted her goggles with a flourish and let out a triumphant whoop. "Best trial run ever," she declared, earning a round of laughter from the other elves. "Ah, Tricky, she's always the spark of energy in the room." But of course, children, no North Pole adventure is complete without a bit of celebration. As the workshop tools were tidied and the sleigh parked safely back on the track, the elves set to work transforming the workshop into a festive haven. Long wooden tables were pulled into the centre of the room and adorned with red and gold cloths. Plates piled high with gingerbread biscuits, bowls of candy canes, and mugs of steaming cocoa appeared as if by magic, or perhaps just the swift hands of the kitchen elves. Fairy lights twinkled above, their glow reflecting in the smiling faces of every elf present. Docky sat at the end of one of the table, a gingerbread star in one hand and a mug of cocoa in the other. Though she rarely showed much emotion, there was a quiet contentment in her eyes as she listened to the lively chatter around her. Tricky, meanwhile, was the life of the party. She stood on a chair, reenacting the day's events with exaggerated gestures and sound effects that had the younger elves giggling uncontrollably. And then, she said, pretending to balance on the sleigh, Docky was, "Hold it steady." And I was like, "Don't worry, I've got this." She mimed chiseling runes in midair, her dramatic flair earning a round of applause. Tim, true to form, kept to the edges of the celebration, tidying up his workbench and checking the sleigh's gauges one more time. But even he couldn't resist the mug of cocoa that Sprinkle brought over, her bright smile as warming as the drink itself. And as the party wound down, Tim lingered by the sleigh, his fingers brushing lightly over its golden filigree. His mind wasn't on the chaos of the day, but on the satisfaction of a job well done, and the work still to come. Docky joined him a moment later, her steady presence a familiar comfort. "You know," Docky said, her voice low, "there's something special about this job. It's not just about the fixing things, it's about making sure everything's ready for the big night. It's about trust." Tim nodded, his gaze still on the sleigh. "And making sure Father Christmas can count on us," he added. And having fun while we do it, Tricky chimed in, appearing suddenly beside them. She gave the sleigh an affectionate pat. We're not just fixing sleighs, we're making Christmas magic. And children, isn't that the truth? The magic of the North Pole isn't just in the tools or the spells, it's the people. It's the elves, it's the way we lift each other. And isn't that true, children? The magic of the North Pole isn't just about the tools or the spells, it's the elves. It's in the way we lift each other up when things go wrong, the way we come together to solve problems, and the way we remind each other that we're never alone in this journey. But I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you about our two favourite furry troublemakers, Bixby and Biscotti. You see, while all this excitement was happening, the cats were having their own little adventure. Bixby, our young and curly-tailed rascal, decided the sleigh's golden runners looked like the perfect place for a nap. He leapt onto the sleigh just as the elves were tidying up, his fluffy tail curling round one of the decorative bells. He purred contentedly, ignoring the startled look from the nearby elves. Meanwhile, Biscotti, the older and wiser of the two, perched on a nearby workbench, her bright eyes watching Bixby with a mix of amusement and disapproval. She let out a meow that had a tone that was clearly scolding Bixby. But Bixby paid her no attention. Instead, he began batting at a loose ribbon left over from the repair process. The ribbon, enchanted with a bit of leftover magic, began to float away, and Bixby chased after it with unbridled enthusiasm. By the time the elves noticed, Bixby was tangled himself and Biscotti in a web of floating ribbons. Biscotti let out an exasperated meow as she battled at the ribbons, her movements precise and dignified compared to Bixby's playful chaos. When Sprinkle finally untangled them, Biscotti gave Bixby a long, pointed stare, her tail flicking with regal authority. Bixby, however, just purred and rubbed against her side as if to say, "Wasn't that fun?" Oh, these two, they may cause a bit of trouble now and then, but they always bring an extra touch of magic to the North Pole. So, children, today's adventure wasn't just about fixing a sleigh. It was about the power of teamwork, the value of persistence, and the joy of working together towards something bigger than ourselves. Tim, Docky, Tricky, Sprinkle, and yes, even Bixby and Biscotti remind us that no challenge is too great when we face it together. So as you close your eyes tonight and dream of snowy skies and jingling bells, remember this: the magic of Christmas doesn't just come with the gifts that we give or the sleighs that we fly. It comes from the love, care, and determination we share with one another. Now I wonder what tomorrow will bring.